At the same time that I'm being harmed by the government now finally acknowledges disclosable conduct of public officials as relates to me, and that harm and imminent danger have happened to me and is currently happening to me. This is demonstrated in a politicised way based on evidence I've provided to the Federal Circuit Court. Yet I am still victimised by the powers that be, and I'm at great risk. I'm again writing and blogging to oppose the continuation of my oppression, in which it seems nothing can be done by the Federal Ombudsman, the Federal Circuit Court, the Attorney General, the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the CDDC scheme, or by submitting a public interest disclosure. I have a clean criminal record, but I've experienced being jailed physically and also bound and financially gagged as a political prisoner and a scapegoat as an individual of interest who has been categorically nuclear character assassinated. In February 2021, I was needlessly incarcerated inside Werribee Mercy Hospital, and I attempted suicide as a result not of mental illness, but of the elongated financial oppression that rendered me a vagrant, which stemmed from powerful political key stakeholders in individuals that the government supported. Upon then being revived from certain death, after being found accidentally with no observable pulse, unresponsive, and released weeks later, the clinical notes of which the hospital needed to name and justify incarcerating me says that my illness was adjustment disorder. That's a fancy way of saying a delayed reaction to actual stress, and additionally that there was no evidence of any psychosis nor delusion, as my previous diagnosis of schizophrenia would have had anyone incorrectly assume. On the 7th of March 2023, a long journey led to a public interest disclosure to an individual who is able to receive disclosure in the CEO and Principal Registrar of the Federal Court, SIA Lagos, at email address sia.lagos@fedcourt.gov.au. I was opposing what I experience as the systemic and elongated victimisation I've suffered over a long period of time, and the psychometric profiling of me by the government, which has led to immeasurable suffering and detriment and financial reduction of any prosperity that I may have been entitled to. Scott Treadwell, a representative from the Federal Court, replied to my PID, my public interest disclosure, by acknowledging that I was indeed able to make it. A public interest disclosure, he wrote, can only be made by a public official. Paragraph 26, bracket 1, bracket A, PID Act. The meaning of public official is defined and includes current or past Australian public sector employees. Section 69 Public Interest Disclosure Act. Section 30 of the Public Interest Disclosure Act extends this meaning to include employees of organisations which provide goods or services under a Commonwealth contract, subsection 30 bracket 3 PID Act. As a general principle, an organisation which is a party to a contract that prescribes the terms for grant funding is not a contracted service provider for the purposes of the Act. On the information you have provided me, I am satisfied that you are or were an employee with the Department of Social Services, providing services under the trading name Rich McLean, Arts Life Coach, Peer Support Worker, and Mental Health Advocate. He also acknowledged the disclosable conduct I was reporting, backed by ample evidence, and that it could, has, and is causing me harm, perverts the course of justice, and the maladministration that is dangerous to me in the way that he describes here. I am satisfied from the correspondence and other information provided that you believe the information you've disclosed tends to show one or more instances of conduct that perverts or is engaged in for the purposes of perverting or attempting pervert the course of justice, section 29, item 3, bracket A, PID Act, and conduct that constitutes maladministration, section 29, item 4, PID Act, and conduct that unreasonably results in a danger to the health or safety of one or more persons, or unreasonably results in or increases a risk of danger to the health or safety of one or more persons, section 29, item 8, PID Act. They acknowledge that I'm in danger. He then follows on to say, it is difficult to determine whether this belief is based on reasonable grounds or not. However, for the purposes of the initial assessment, I am prepared to assume that the conduct disclosed in your correspondence and other information received is disclosable conduct for the purposes of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Now, I had to comment regarding whether my belief is based on reasonable grounds or not. I provided some examples to him which back up my belief that harm has and is occurring to me. The first one was the hospital records from my suicide attempt. It says the attempt was lethal and requires surgical repair. That this oppression could literally persecute me to death under a duty of care of a hospital and causing a brain impairment and there be zero recourse and a cover-up proves that harm is happening to me. And then I've directed my attention to a picture of me being violently beaten up inside Werribee Mercy Hospital with black eyes, a cut nose and a broken nose. The evidence of my harm came as I was incarcerated and then beaten up inside Werribee Mercy Hospital, and that was by an undercover government thug. And then I've directed his attention to a photo of my door at my Footscray rental where I used to live. The police kicked in the door. The Footscray Police, who I cannot report crime to, kicked in the door of my rental and squat and incarcerated me. When they incarcerated me in a psychiatric hospital, and the police and the hospital oversaw the malicious, intentional destruction by Hung Ho of Chelsea, my old landlord, of every single thing that I own, and it was taken to the tip, and then I was rejected into a homelessness shelter. I then directed his attention to a summary, mental health summary, dated 9th of the 3rd, 2021, that says there was a suicide attempt requiring an 8-day ICU admission. The years-long oppression that drove me to suicide inside a hospital is shocking. It was deemed fatal and I was revived from certain death. And now there is a cover-up at Werribee Mercy Hospital for compensation into the abandonment of duty of care and the cognitive brain detriment that I suffered since that time. To then further demonstrate my suffering, I sent him to a picture of me winning $40,000 in an online casino. Numerous times I won $20,000, $40,000, $50,000 in online casinos. My gambling was a vain attempt to gain money to live because I was being financially oppressed and all of my prosperity was consciously, maliciously and intentionally redacted from me. The casinos were illegitimate and they started taking money out of my account and they did not pay the winnings. Bendigo Bank agreed that they were fraudulent and refunded some of my deposits, but not all of them. The bank said to solve the issue, to go to AFCA to resolve it, but as we know, they were setting me up to fail. And now, as a democratic citizen of the country who deserves to go to a government public held office and statutory agency to be able to solve their problems, I'm actually banned from there. Although these two necessary points that were mentioned for a PID were acknowledged, my public interest disclosure was rejected because of this part. As I am not satisfied that your disclosure meets the requirement of the PID Act to be an internal disclosure, I must decide in the language used in Section 43 of the PID Act as above, not to allocate the handling of that disclosure to any agency. And with that, my whistleblower status, in which I would be protected and compensated, was not granted. I still remain at risk by what appears to me but ineligible to be perceived by anyone else other than me, because it's me who's being tortured, is a tyrannical government that redacts my prosperity, restricts my rights, blocks my equality before the law or access to it. And additionally, my former partner, Steve Iasonidis, who used to work for ASIO, threatens to kill me and my beloved dog. The coercive financial control over my life via the refusal to acknowledge the relationship or a settlement to divide assets was a bad enough form of family violence. But to have him threaten to kill me and my dog, the only thing I have left is my pet dog, in order to cause me harm, is just an example of how powerful people intend to cause me harm, and it is not okay. Today, I'm emailing every parliamentarian, and I've also emailed the European Union Human Rights and the Australian Human Rights Commission. And I'm asking someone to intervene in this situation in a way which quantifies the responsibilities of public officials and parliamentarians to free members of the public, which I am. Especially those members of the public who have disproportionately suffered through victimisation and a provable psychometric profiling, prejudice and discrimination. It's a responsibility of a parliamentarian to respond to a letter from the public. It is within every public official's remit to act within the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and also the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and lastly, the Convention on the Rights of Disabled Persons. I urge you to respond because I am actually, from my perspective, being tortured, and I am at further risk of more harm. Great harm has already come to me via the pointed malicious neglect which I have faced, which continues. Without intervention, I will further suffer this malicious intention to cause me harm in a way that attacks my potential prosperity and my finances and in my money, and attacks my character. In this is exactly what it is, a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. At the twin apex of my persecution is an Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, who refuses to acknowledge me, and additionally, the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet, who have at first acknowledged thousands of matches to my freedom of information and then rejected it, saying documents don't exist. And that's exactly how they want me to be in the world, but I do exist. That document of freedom of information from the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet would have revealed the following. The former relationship in which I lived with and was engaged to be married with a public official in Stefan Iasonidis, who worked at the time for ASIO, and whom the government protect via demonstration that no federal agency will investigate my exploitation, whether it be the Tax Office, ASIC, Centrelink, ASIO, or AGIS, who investigate ASIO. It would reveal the 5-year relationship with a public official, and there's ample evidence for that. And to this day, I'm really unsure of how this plain fact of life could be overlooked, especially by all my friends and family that have caused me so much financial distress and victimisation. It was not equitable and he exploited me. And now the government are protecting his wealth and reputation at the expense of mine. I've got an attached letter here from ASIC in which I complain about the exploitation and the refusal to separate amicably, and they refuse to investigate him. I've also attached a carer's pension from Centrelink, in which Steve Iasonidis, unknowns to me, feathered his own nest, exploiting my apparent illness whilst earning $30,000 and $40,000 a month at ASIO. I, on the other hand, was studying and working whilst on a disability pension of less than $450 a week. At that time, I published a children's book, Grogan the Monster in What Do You Love, as part of my master's degree, and I utilised its launch to raise funds for the Royal Children's Hospital Banksia unit for child and adolescent mental health. My perspective was using creativity for good and sticking up for the underdog. His was working for the man in a cushy government job for over $30,000 a month and feathering his own nest further by exploiting my perceived disabilities by receiving a carer's pension without my knowledge. Continuing, that document from Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet would have highly likely also revealed the following things: that I'm a person of public agency and a public profile because of a human rights awarded autobiography I wrote called Recovered Not Cured, A Journey Through Schizophrenia by Allen and Unwin in 2002. It was also Sane Australia's Book of the Year and was awarded a Human Rights Award from the Victorian Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. That I was a former illustrator for both the Herald Sun and then the Age. The former vilified me, in effect publicly humiliating me with an article on my book called My Descent into Madness, and then the Age later fired me because of that public profile that was attached to the autobiography. That I have a public profile as someone with a mental illness, that I've achieved beyond all odds a Doctor of Philosophy at Victoria University, that I've spoken hundreds of times across the country, including inside Parliament House in Canberra, and across local, state, national and international radio and TV, and that the last Attorney General, Michaelia Cash, would not acknowledge my justice issues with my work cover at AAT after losing at AFCA and Australian Human Rights Commission, and she refused to intervene and sent me to the SANE helpline. And also would reveal that this Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, the pinnacle of everyone legal in this country to intervene, rejects all of my approaches to him. It would also reveal that I was framed by a very powerful lawyer, Mr. Russell Ball, who silenced legitimate evidence that was to be heard before a court I had about an unfortunate malpractice complaint about a GP. He silenced my evidence at the Health Complaints Commissioner, the Mental Health Complaints Commissioner, the Police, IBAC, NHPOPC, APRA, the Victorian Inspectorate and the Ombudsman. And lo and behold, he advises the government on policy and he also advises the Ombudsman. It would also reveal that I'm banned at AFCA. Now let's look at that AFCA issue. As a democratic citizen of this country, I'm now banned from engaging a federal statutory authority for the purposes of getting help and a resolution to do with financial issues. That is a place, a statutory authority, a government body, whereby ordinary, free-reigning Australians can go to get issues of a financial nature or matter solved. But me, I'm banned. Why? I was banned because I threatened a whistleblower on staff at AFCA who were delaying, denying and deferring my just financial settlements to an extraordinary degree whilst I didn't have enough to eat or a safe place I could afford to stay. AFCA's own policies documents state that settlements of a financial nature of a financially marginalised person should be heard by an ombudsman within 4 to 6 weeks, but mine took over a year and a half. Of course, I was entirely frustrated by this whole thing, and I suspected that something was not right, and I was paranoid for a good reason. And now I'm sure that it's not right, and I can prove it, and I have, with evidence. I sometimes record things because the nature of my illness puts my perceptions at a high level of uncertainty. One of those recordings is with Tim Goss, head of service delivery at AFCA, who was clearly gaslighting my way into financial oblivion, and he did so with the conceited audacity of someone, as opposed to me, does not have money problems or indeed justice issues. In the end, he was well aware of what he was doing as a conscious and malicious way in which to redact prosperity from me and cause me damage. This problem for me was and is systemic, and it's political, and it's actioned by senior public officials and government agents in high levels of the government. It's linked in with my public profile, and because the things I have to say threaten the state of things and the very government itself, it is that's the reason why they're trying to destroy me. It is also victimising me, and victimisation is against the law. The legal definition of victimisation is when someone subjects or threatens to subject the other person to any detriment. And there are three types of detriment. Detriment relating to a personal injury, including mental injury, a personal injury loss. Economic detriment that is not related to personal injury, pure economic loss. And detriment relating to damage to property. I have suffered enormous detriment, even to the point of a fatal injury in which I was revived from death. This is the very manner in which my conversation with returned SAS soldier Tony Riddle exposes the truth about government psychometric profiling and scapegoating, and that people and individuals can be so universally vilified by the government it can kill them, and indeed that their demise is planned, intended, malicious, and that it has a goal of utter character assassination or destruction of that person or entity. You need money and a job to live, but when your prosperity is intentionally redacted from you and denied to you from many different sources, that it causes homelessness, it's easy to see that there is a definitive and provable movement of oppression. The worst thing for me has been for me that my poverty is now dressed up as mental illness, and I'm vilified for it. My AFCA banning is a situation that's caused massive financial losses, over $2 million, and detriment in regards of personal injury, economic loss, and damage to property. Indeed, my entire house and its contents were taken to the tip and destroyed. The CDD scheme through finance.gov.au fails to acknowledge my losses and the misadministration that intentionally ran me in the ground, and they refuse to provide any compensation or acknowledgement that the misadministration of these public authorities has led to my downfall and my poverty. My problem is that I'm easily exploitable. I've publicly identified as someone with a mental illness, and that is known to the public, and that's how I'm scapegoated. Just have to take a look at the example of the Herald Sun vilifying and humiliating me in 2004, I think it was, when they put my words in the newspaper with a huge heading saying, "My descent into madness, how schizophrenia stole Richard McLean's mind." It must be remembered too that I went on after that period in my life to complete a Doctor of Philosophy at Victoria University. And after that was published, it was only a matter of weeks before I lost my job at the Age. I went on to work in mental health advocacy for over 30 years. In my work, which was fiercely independent, I advocated for the marginalised in a secular fashion that amplified the voices of the voiceless, and it was a privilege to serve Australians from Dubbo to Warrnambool to Canberra and Parliament House, Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra to ABC National, Triple J, Triple R, Stateline, Dateline, Good Morning Australia, the drug debate on SBS, and dozens of other live radio guest speaking appearances, and dozens of conversations to people in all walks of life at local, state and federal and even international levels, at high schools, community groups, town halls, the Early Psychosis Prevention Centre, and in and around the public service. In 2002, I met Tony Riddle, a former SAS soldier and survivor of the Black Hawk helicopter crash. I explained my story of oppression to him, how I felt that I had been victimised and abused, and that my prosperity intentionally and maliciously redacted from me in order to cause me harm. He responded in conversation with the very mechanism and methodology by which the government can treat individuals that are psychometrically profiled and sacrificed, rather than admitting that the system is responsible for the architecture that allows the scapegoat to exist. And it's chilling listening. You should have a listen to it. Everything I say in this is backed up by evidence. My question to every parliamentarian and authority today with this letter and this video message is, can you please intervene to oppose my needless victimisation and oppression? After all, the prolonged gaslighting and abuse has led to my suicide attempt inside a hospital, which was deemed fatal and for which I now suffer a cognitive brain impairment. There is yet another cover-up at the Werribee Mercy Hospital that rejects all liability and duty of care to me whilst I was imprisoned. You can intervene with my victimisation and oppression in the following ways. 1. You can demand my public interest disclosure at the Commonwealth Ombudsman or the Federal Circuit Court. 2. Force WorkSafe Minister Danny Pearson to respond to me pointing out legislation that if a liability with a workplace cannot be established, then it's the minister's remit to acknowledge the issue within 21 days. And mine has been over 2 years, and I've just failed it at the AAT, just like I predicted. You could demand that an equal, fair and reasonable settlement happen between my former partner and I, who worked for ASIO and whom the government protects. It is my opinion that I have and am being tortured. You could demand that the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading or Punishment Rights be followed as, for the purposes of this convention, the term torture means by any act which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act or a third person who is committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind, when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of the public official or other person acting in official capacity. And attached to this is a document that I submitted as part of my public interest disclosure, mentioned at the top of this letter to the Federal Circuit Court. It contains an absolute plethora of undeniable evidence in facts that identifies the way I've been victimised, underpinned by powerful key political stakeholders. And I welcome you all to examine it, or have your government helpers examine it, in order to ratify that what I am claiming is indeed true, and that intervention is needed in order to remove the threat of harm that is happening to me and will definitively further occur to me if my public interest disclosure is not granted. These political pawns have acted from afar to disable my life in cowardice and with enormous political power, money and legal privilege. They are lawyers, public officials and public servants. They are complicit to toe the party line because they are paid a wage that demands it of them. But one day, a public official or parliamentarian will see and hear my story, and they're going to be the one, that one single figure who can blow this whole conspiracy out of the water. They will say, it's shit what happened to Rich McLean, and I'm going to help him. And I invite everyone to do the same. After all, it's just not shit that's what's happened to me. It's immoral, it's illegal, it's demonstrably because of prejudice and discrimination. I've now identified it for what it is. And that is, this is a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. I've acted for tens of thousands of people in my time, and I am opposed by just as many. The difference is that the people that I helped, I was a voice and they wanted the help. But tens of thousands of public officials, lawyers and individuals that oppose me are afraid of me calling them on their bullshit. Recently, in November 2022, after being psychometrically profiled by the Australian government and for being vilified for mental illness that was really dressed up poverty because I had no equality before the law or access to it, and my potential compensations were maliciously, intentionally redacted from me, I had my door kicked in and cuffed, and I was taken to a hospital by police. Whilst incarcerated basically as a political prisoner, the Werribee Mercy Hospital and the Footscray Police oversaw my landlord Hung Ho of Chelsea enter my home and remove all of my things and take them to the tip. In effect, they destroyed every single thing that I owned. I was rejected from the hospital into a homeless shelter with only the clothes on my back. It's crystal clear that this has been an unbalanced, uneven, illegal and inequitable fight for me over many years. It is based in a prejudice, stigma and a shame that's not mine to embody. Life is literally not economically or rationally sustainable for me at this time, especially in terms of shelter, food and medicine. All I want to do is live so that I can give again, and I was grateful to serve the Australian community before, and I want to again. Please utilise this email and video message in order to expose corruption and cross the line when it comes to criticising who pays these public officials and oversees roles as politicians of this country. Please refer to the start of the letter and ensure now that I am free from further persecution with my whistleblower protections in place so that further damage and detriment may not come to me and potentially even be sacrificed. To this, I mean the financial oppression and victimisation would be so much that I would kill myself, and inevitably mental illness and drugs would then be blamed. Currently, I don't have enough to stay securely in a home, and there is not enough to live or eat or have medicine. And I've never ever had a lawyer despite all of these issues that I've faced and that I'm facing. I'm a failed whistleblower. I can't go to police. I can't rely on family. I can't rely on my few friends. The NDIS have locked up all my funding at the NDIA. The Workplace Minister Danny Pearson won't respond, nor will Bill Shorten or the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus. I'm banned at WorkSafe. I'm restricted communication at Comcare, rejected at the Australian Human Rights Commission, banned at AFCA, rejected my freedom of information from the Office of Prime Minister and Cabinet. I have death threats for me and my dog from my former partner, who the government protects his money, and I can never get help at legal aid. I'm framed and rejected my emails at the Ombudsman, rejected not one but 2 work cover cases, rejected insurance and my HCF income assist policy. My own child sexual abuse case, where I was the child victim, was cited by a Geelong magistrate as, quote, doomed to fail. I've had my business website maliciously deleted along with my digital identity, my ABN cancelled from the tax department. I've been violently attacked 3 times, once inside a public hospital and one literally mowed down in the street by an apparently out of control car in what I suspect to be a government or police undercover vehicle. And if you think I'm paranoid, I've included some footage of the Secret Service outside of my Footscray squat. I seek your immediate intervention so that I may be safe from further harm and be protected from the pointed neglect and victimisation I've horrendously endured. I would like all public officials and parliamentarians and people in positions of authority to act with an intention to create justice for my profound suffering and detriment in all ways. If you do nothing at all, and I hope you will, and I even demand that you do, please report the death threats from my former ASIO employed partner via gay chat app to the police, because threatening to kill me and my dog is not okay. The government has now acknowledged the disclosable conduct and the harm that has and is happening to me. Why is it okay now that my public interest disclosure is rejected on a technicality, leaving me unprotected, uncompensated, broke, near homeless, and further with barely a home or enough food or medicine? I am a man who suffers apparently from schizophrenia, but that does not negate that a conspiracy is not happening. I have a cognitive brain disorder as well, and I find it excruciating that I have to work long hours and labour over words and language to collate this evidence of me being damned to hell, only to be identified as mad or troublesome or a nuisance. And this is another chapter of my torture through gaslighting and vilification and victimisation. It is in fact me who is right in asserting that this conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and vile victimisation that is still happening to me, with the support of enormous amounts of evidence I've provided, it actually is happening. And the system that is oppressing me does not like being called out. I've lost everything. My job, my childhood, my work cover, my insurances, my rights, my access to the law, my life, my memory, my business, my digital identity, my home, my possessions, my photos, my family and most of my friends, my freedoms, my happiness, my ability to cope, my semblance of a life resembling anything but normal. But this is the hill that I choose to die on. Today was my 50th birthday, a day that should have been with family and friends and prosperity. But instead, I spent it with barely enough food, barely a home, and not enough medicine. There was a small grace in meeting someone new, but no calls from family or barely friends, no cake, no gathering. My reputation is in tatters for my self-advocacy over this issue. It's enough to make you sick. It's enough to make you want to give up and kill yourself. It is true that this continued oppression goes on, then I will die a scapegoat, but it won't be mental illness that kills me, but it will be the systemic way I've been sacrificed by powerful people and a world who has been too afraid to dirty their hands or be involved with my business beyond their narrow remits. It's not brave or courageous that a person with money, power and privilege, with a job and privacy and legal rights, can witness this suffering and not acknowledge its profound reach and then eat and have a life while I don't. And then to spin it around and blame me for not budgeting right. Get fucked. It's these very people, and that's most people, that have become part of my problem. For public officials who are paid large sums of money to be in the public service, they are all paid to toe the line, and it would have only taken one brave official with some compassion to throw this out of the water, and this conspiracy to pervert the course of justice would be over and my persecution halted. However, they're paid to vilify me and further oppress me in their prejudice and their judgments. It's neither brave nor courageous to have tenure of my further oppression and throw me under the bus whilst being paid by the government with your heads in the trough. You know who is brave and courageous? Me. And that's my statement for today. I demand that my whistleblower protection be put over the line, and I demand that my protections be put in place so that I will not further suffer the detriment of this conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.